So, hello everyone. Today, on a very special reunion episode of Students Against Mandates, we are thankful that Dr. Kevin Bass has joined us. Dr. Bass is a medical researcher and scientist who has a degree in medical anthropology and biology from UT Texas and UT Austin, a master's in immunology, and is currently an MD PhD student. You may know Kevin from following his very popular Twitter account or seeing him make appearances on such shows as Ask Dr. Drew and Tucker Carlson Tonight. Over the past few years, Kevin's journey as a medical fact checker has led him on a fascinating journey of discovery and respect to his thoughts on the handling of COVID-19. Regardless of whether you agree with him on all his findings or whether you don't, one of the most notable aspects of Kevin Bass's work and story is that it has helped us all to call back humility into the public debate around COVID-19. And we are so thankful to have him on the show today. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheldon and Kamil.
I'm a big fan, so forgive me in advance if I fanboy a little bit. We'll hop right into it. Actually, the first question we wanted to ask you. So on December 12th, 2022, you tweeted a pretty compelling message to your followers, and I'll read it out loud for the people listening. You wrote, "I was wrong about lockdowns and mandates. I was wrong, and the reason I was wrong about was my tribalism, my emotions, my distorted understanding of human nature and of the virus. It doesn't matter much, but I wanted to apologize for being wrong." So obviously that message is, I mean, I can't imagine it was an easy thing to say to the public, especially. I mean, we're human at the end of the day. It's hard to admit when we're wrong or when we think we're wrong. Most of us want to be right, including myself. I'm guilty of this. We're just wondering if you could walk us through the months and the weeks leading up to this public announcement, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the factors or discoveries that led you to taking this position. And if you can also tell us what was your position on the pandemic before your so-called revelation.
Yeah, no, so I grew up, starting as a teenager, like 14, all the way up till I maybe even 30, 14 to 30, or most of my adult life. I was a Marxist. I was on the far left. And even at the point when the pandemic hit, I was also on pretty strongly on the left. And so when the pandemic hit, and people were not, they didn't want lockdowns. They wanted to have their freedom, and they wanted to be able to go outside, have parties and stuff. I thought, that's terrible. You must be some terrible, selfish people. That's evil. And if you want to promote that and communicate that you should maintain your freedoms, and I always called them freedom, FREEDUMBS. That's what I called them on Twitter with the rest of Med Twitter and the woke Med Twitter at the time, because I was a part of that.
I've been called that a few times.
Yeah, like you guys are, yeah, obviously you guys are like dumb or evil, or like we don't really understand. I'm kind of putting myself back in those shoes. Like, we don't really understand you guys at that point at all. And I don't think most of the left and of the establishment still understands this perspective. But at the time, I thought it was just really dumb. It was a dumb perspective. If you guys wanted to go leave your houses during lockdowns, you should be like, the police should arrest you. I literally was that far on that end. I thought, and then whenever I saw like the Chinese people being welded into their apartments, I thought, I didn't think, oh, I'm horrified. I thought, like, we should do that. Wow. That was how far I was. That was how far I was when COVID happened. And yeah, and I was pro-mat, like, and whenever I remember walking around with my daughters at the museums and stuff, because I used to take them to the museums all the time. I remember wearing my mask. I would make them all wear a mask religiously, essentially. And I would be really mad, like super angry whenever I saw somebody without a mask. I train like martial arts, and then it's a sick thought that came into my head, but I was like, I wish I could fight that person, because that person's a bad person. So it was just like, I'm just communicating this because I'm going to communicate the extent of the pathology that I think was inside me. during that time, and the aggressive feelings that I think we can all very clearly see when we go online and we talk about this, and we say, and especially if we get some traction, we get dumped on. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but like we get completely dumped on. It becomes this kind of thing where they'll try to destroy you or anybody who promotes a message that's opposed to this narrative that I believed at that time. They'll try by any means necessary to shut that down. I feel convinced that many of them, maybe this is a little bit hyperbolic, but this is true. Many of them would either like take away your Twitter accounts, put you in prison. Maybe some of them have aggressive enough feelings to like want to kill people who are not on that side. Definitely. I truly believe that. I certainly had very aggressive feelings. I didn't ever think about like harming people. I just, but wanting to fight them is different than wanting to, but
wanting to forcefully put a mask on their face. But kindly though.
I never had any fantasies about forcefully putting masks on anybody. I can say that much about myself, but I certainly was aggressive enough in my thinking that I kind of wished that, I could get into a fight with them. So I was on board with canceling people for not taking the vaccine. And then whenever mistakes were made, whenever officials maybe got the science wrong about something, because I wasn't on the side of constantly thinking about and criticizing the public health officials, I couldn't see that there was a systemic misinformation coming from the establishment. So I thought whenever they said something wrong, it's just that they got something wrong. Sometimes the establishment gets some things wrong. We're not all perfect, but overall, they're going in the right direction. Overall, if you look outside, if you just see what we're doing right now, institutions work overall. We're progressing overall as a society. Truth is growing more or less. Technologies are getting better. So something that works. And I thought the establishment in general works, and sometimes they get some things wrong. That was my view at that point. So I thought people who criticized and like really focused in on the things that the establishment was getting wrong were not seeing the forest for the trees. They were focusing on one small thing, and they were blowing those small things out of proportion and not seeing the good that the establishment was doing, and then trying to make other people or persuade other people that the establishment was wrong and bad. And because the establishment is good and it's overall producing good things, it's overall producing good medicines, it's overall helping everybody with their health, when you then criticize the establishment and persuade people based on these tiny little things that had nothing to do with what the establishment overall is doing, then you're destroying trust. And when you destroy trust, you're destroying people's health. Because you're not giving
their ability to live.
Yes, you're impairing or impinging upon, you're blocking their ability to use these wonderful resources that the medical and public health establishment are offering to the public. And so you're a bad person because you're getting in the way of people's health. You're hurting people.
You didn't think what the institutions were doing was deliberate at this point, I guess, right? Sorry, go ahead.
With respect to COVID, I still have a naive view, and this is from my own perspective. I was a true believer, right? So there are people who are not true believers. I think most of the people who are really aggressive online and like trying to shut people down and suppress, and I think most of those people are true believers. Okay, so I think most of the people are like me, but there may be. It's also a spectrum, and there's always this question of to what extent it's malicious or deliberate. I can't answer that question as well, because if I think about all the people I know in my circles at that time, and some of them were like 1 degree of separation from Walensky and Ashish Jha, and I had very close connections that were very, very like very close to those kinds of people.
Mhm.
Everybody that I knew truly believed. And yes, we all agreed that there were problems, etc. But I still, in my heart of hearts, and this is an unpopular position, even my friends in sort of the sort of critics, the COVID critics circle, most of them, although my closest mentors tend to agree with me, but even many of my friends disagree. They think it was deliberate, it was malicious, it was evil. I don't think so. I think it's ideological capture. I truly do.
Yeah.
So when we say deliberate, I think it wasn't, they weren't deliberately trying to do the right thing. I think they were trying to do, or sorry, they weren't deliberately trying to do the wrong thing. They're trying to do the right thing. I truly believe that. But it's more of a mind virus model, right?
Yeah.
So so that's, the question, yeah. So at the time, I didn't realize that there were alternative perspectives to the one that I believed that had a lot of value, and in fact, I think now I think have more value than
Right.
And are fundamentally correct. Now, I still do think there's something important about what the COVIDians, if we want to call them COVIDians, the sort of establishment, that's a valid perspective from a certain point of view, but it's too narrow. And because it's so narrow and it doesn't take into account other values and principles and externalities, it's not as good. But it's still, they believe it, or they believed it at the time, at least. So that's what okay. So I believe this all the way through, and I paid attention to what, and interrupt me at any time, because
No, please keep going.
So all the way up through throughout the whole pandemic, there were still a couple people who I respected on the other side, on the kind of critic side. One of them was Vinay Prasad, because he's very, and I come from a sort of debunking anti-misinformation background, and so he was speaking my language about the formal, the way that science functions formally, and how he didn't think from this rigorous evidence-based perspective that many of the recommendations, such as with masks, some aspects of the COVID, the vaccine science, school closures, and he was very articulate, and he didn't think that these perspectives or policies lived up to good, appropriate scientific standards. They didn't meet appropriate scientific standards, and because he spoke that language, I always respected him. But I had my point of view, and I was focused on a lot of more broader health and nutrition issues. And I think this is actually why most people went along with the narrative, is because they just didn't look into it enough. And so but I respected some critics at the time. And so as I started to look more and more into it throughout 2022, and I also should take a slight sidetrack, a little bit of a sidetrack, because it is very important to understand where I was becoming about the establishment over the course of 2022. So small side quests I need to talk about, and then we'll get back into the COVID. I was a debunker, but the thing is often debunkers are just talking to other academics. Like I can criticize what somebody says about the science of cholesterol, and I can go talk about the different confounders and the different studies, but normal people who are just looking for somebody to tell them how to make their health better, they're not interested in these complicated, abstruse discussions about why X, Y, or Z health influencer is misrepresenting what the science says. And so that was my whole thing. And so I had a lot of respect from academics, but I wasn't reaching the normal, to average, the ordinary person in the way that I wanted to, because I wanted them to understand that there's a lot of health misinformation online. And I wanted them to connect with the kinds of, to understand that fact. And if I'm just criticizing other prominent health influencers, they're not going to be attracted to that because they're attracted to what do I do for my health?
Yeah.
And so what I did during 2022 is I pivoted from being more of a critic to promoting more concrete messages and diving into the science using the skills that I had developed over the course of my PhD and over the course of my debunking, using those skills to then bring out interesting scientific phenomenon, things that will potentially go viral, that are just interesting to people, but are still meet the very careful, meticulous, rigorous standards that I had developed as a scientist and as a debunker that were very central to my identity. And so I started to do that, and then I started to get criticized by my community. And that was very strange to me because, look, I'm reading these papers very carefully. I know how to draw these inferences. I can even have a discussion where I'm talking to different people at length and explaining my positions. But it turns out that my motivations and my attitudes about let me be careful here. I think there's a different way of saying it. It turns out that what appears to be evidence-based, what we can call evidence-based, like evidence-based this, that, or what is in the orthodoxy as being evidence-based, most people don't believe it because they are super familiar with the data. They believe it because somebody who they trust or respect tells them that they should believe it. And it turns out that some of these orthodoxies are not quite right. Sometimes there's ideologies, sometimes there's conflicts of interest. You have to get down to the details, but at some point, sometimes the rigor breaks down. And the messages that we're getting are kind of approximately right, but they're missing something important. And that missing something important is often driven by non-rationalist, non-scientific factors, like conflicts of interest or ideological orientations. And so I started going really deep into different fields that were not my fields, but I was reading the literature at a deep level, and I was communicating that to the public, and I was getting these terrible responses. And what I came to understand is these terrible responses were coming from people, influencers, people online who were portraying themselves as experts, who had, for one reason or another, an ideological investment on these kinds of questions. And then I started to think more, and this happened to me multiple times. And I was doing small things. So let me give you a really good example. There were two papers published in 2018, 2019 by the FDA showing that if you put chemical sunscreens on people in the normal way that's recommended according to the dermatological associations, the skin cancer associations, you put it on it according to the recommendations, and then you look at the blood concentrations of the chemicals that are in the sunscreen, they exceed a certain safety threshold. Almost all of the sunscreens that are available on the market exceed a certain safety threshold. Wow. Now, this safety threshold is not established by experiments. It's established by just a sort of a rule of thumb threshold that then triggers these regulatory agencies at the FDA. And these were the top regulators at the FDA who were writing these papers. And there was like 15 of them, tons of MD-PhDs, like the best people in the field. It triggers these regulatory agencies to then go do additional studies. So they have to do longer-term developmental studies in rodents, longer-term carcinogen studies, teratogenic studies in rodents, basically more extensive studies as a result of crossing this blood threshold of this compound crossing the threshold for the maximum acceptable concentration that they have as a rule of thumb. And so they published these studies in 2018, 2019, maybe in 17, 18, something along those lines. There was 2 separate years, and it was around those years. showing this and saying, hey, we've got to do additional studies. And this is an evidence gap because these additional studies haven't been done. This is an evidence gap, an evidence gap with regard to the safety of these sunscreens, right? It doesn't mean that these concentrations in the blood are toxic. It doesn't mean that they're going to cause cancer. It doesn't mean that they're going to cause developmental abnormalities. All it means is that according to the FDA, it's not acceptable for it to cross this concentration threshold, and more safety studies need to be done. Mm-hmm. And so I communicated this, right? I communicated this. And so the immediate backlash was, you are discouraging people from using these sunscreens, which prevent people from getting skin cancer. Okay. And I tried to clarify. I see your point. You know, it does kind of make people a little more hesitant. And yes, skin cancer is a big issue. Also skin aging. I'm a big believer in you know, in sunscreens to prevent skin aging. It's very important, in fact, or at least limiting sunlight as far as facial aging is concerned. But I then tried to explain, say, look, there's alternative sunscreens. There's mineral sunscreens, zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, other alternatives that work just as well as these chemical sunscreens. There's no downside to using alternatives. We don't have to use the chemical sunscreens right now. There is this evidence gap. It doesn't mean that these are going to kill you, but there's just an evidence gap. That's the objective fact about the state of the science at the time. Mm-hmm. But simply saying that was, I got, so the people who sort of regulate this space, who are considered the experts in this space, twisted what I said and tried to make it sound like I was anti-science, and like they wanted me to sound like I was this natural living type person who was promoting an anti-chemical ideology. And since these communities online, and there's different communities in different fields that sort of dominate the discourse depending upon what perspectives they take, but this community online fights that point of view all the time, this sort of anti-chemical. And so then they thought, or she either projected onto me this sort of anti-chemical view, like I'm scared of chemicals, only want natural living, I don't like science, all this stuff. They either projected onto that to me intentionally, or if it wasn't intentional, simply their ideological framework, their kind of emotional ideological framework didn't allow them to see that wasn't what I was saying. I was saying just what I'm saying to you. And so, but they dogpiled me. I got unfollowed by a ton of people. My good friends would come send me text messages, say, you need to stop talking about this issue. I'm just like, I understand why you people are acting like such nuts, but like, you can't act like such nuts, because we should be talking about things scientifically. But nonetheless, they do.
Which requires discourse.
It requires discourse. And it requires being tolerant of discourse. But these people, what happens, and I'm not trying to excuse them, and I haven't thought about this. What I can just say is this: is what happens is people get emotionally and ideologically invested in shutting certain kinds of people down, or thinking maybe they even heard my arguments and thought, okay, maybe you're right, Kevin, but like, I'm just putting myself in their shoes. Maybe you're right, Kevin, but you're giving ammunition to these bad people who are then going to be like, ooh, we should just live in the forest and like not have any chemicals anywhere. You're giving ammunition to these bad people. And so you're basically, even though you're right, you're wrong, and you still need to shut up. Right?
Fall in line.
Yes. And I was going to ask Doctor too. I mean, Kevin, pardon me. We find an interesting thing in just as you mentioned with the sunscreen findings there, how there almost appears to be what maybe one could draw a line to being somewhat of a margin of error. And within our own academic institutions, at least the call on behalf of your findings that there is a period of unknown here, at least worthy of more information. And particularly me and Camille were discussing prior to the interview, finding that within our own academic institutions, there was a particular repellent nature or sentiment among the student body towards, or I should say at least a growing one from what we found, towards the notion of a margin of error within the dissemination of information. And I was going to ask, did you, I mean, notice this too? Perhaps this is an area of our society in which this lack of nuance is stems from. Did you perhaps see that at your own time in the academic institutions?
Do you mean like among my fellow students?
Yes, yes, among the student body there.
So are you saying that you think that the student body is becoming more intolerant or has this intolerance to a margin of error?
Yes.
Perhaps less willing to get to the bottom of certain scientific facts as opposed to
Mhm.
regurgitating what they were taught.
Yes. Yeah,
I know
being politically.
I've yeah, being politically correct, exactly. Like
Yes, yeah,
I found just sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry,
No, no,
my
no. I
apologies.
want to hear your view. Actually, I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this because I have my point of view that I was expressing. There is this intolerance. I hear you. I'm yes. But I'm also fascinated. Where does that come from?
Mhm.
Because you know, but Camille, you were going to say something about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say especially so I took philosophy for my undergrad. Um, we were relatively, it was discourse in the class was okay for philosophy, but I took some like I minored in political science, and that's where I really found that the notion, and I mean political science at the end of the day is philosophy, just more targeted philosophy. Um, I found that especially as a libertarian myself, going to a liberal arts school in Waterloo, Ontario, it was impossible to rebut my teacher's notions or my teacher's instructions. It was deemed offensive to question a political rhetoric or political ideology, and I can't imagine what it's like in STEM fields. Um, I, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question. Are students, and I know for a fact, like I was one of very few students that would, raise an eyebrow and go, "Wait, what did the professor exactly say there? And how did he get down? How did he reach this conclusion?"
And just to add to that, and I would be curious, Camille, if you found the same too, that there was the inability for some students when making an argument to believe that the opposing side perhaps had any degree of worth to their argument, so that there was almost
Absolutely.
a black and white in every scenario, particularly in political science, which was
Right.
more or less my field there too. And yeah, so that was just going to be passed on to Kevin there too. If maybe even yes, in the STEM fields there and in science there was that lack of nuance to say the least.
I think in science, okay, so STEM is science, technology, engineering, and medicine, right? I think in science it's different than in medicine. I think in um well, my experience in medicine is a little bit different than I think a lot of people's experiences because and I can talk about that in a moment. But in science, certainly I think it's a lot more like philosophy. Certainly there's different degrees of tolerance for people who question things and have a habit of questioning things, and I have a habit of questioning things. I've always had it my whole life. um but the general principle, the foundation of the field is very much like philosophy, where we're looking for truth. And so questioning and discussing is highly valued there. Medicine is very different. um
The degrees of certainty, I assume, are much more defined, and maybe questioning certain notions or practices is looked at in a negative light, at least in medicine. Or
yeah, I think doctors are trained. If you think about just what the training entails to become a physician, if you just do basic pre-med, you don't necessarily go do a philosophy major then go into medicine, which you're going to have
yeah,
a very different perspective than if you do just straight pre-med, straight biology. You're just regurgitating things, honestly, as a pre-med. Even in the hardest classes like organic chemistry, uh you do some thinking, but it's technical. It's like a technical uh it's like a how-to kind of knowledge, as opposed to more of a thoughtful and theoretical kind of knowledge, which you get in philosophy and the sciences. And so if you're just that kind of person and you're going into medicine, you don't have the training and you don't have the perspective, assuming that's not your predisposition or some other influence that you got in your background, you don't have the training or the perspective really to understand how to think that way. You're trying to think, what do I do for the patient? What is the right thing to do for the patient? And so there's a right thing to do for the patient and a wrong thing to do for the patient. And that's all that you need to know, really. And so they do respect scientists, but more like they want scientists to tell them what to do. Okay. Like, what do I do? What is going to help my patients? Which is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to be a mechanic for a car and be like, hey, look, I'm not interested in the thermodynamics of how the oils and the fluids work. I just don't care. What I want to know is, how do I make the car run? That's what doctors do. Okay. And so this sort of truth-seeking kind of discussion that you might have in science, they don't know how to engage in that. Okay. And in fact, medicine's so hierarchical that in fact they're and it's also self-policed and self-regulated, that they're also policing each other in terms of doing the right things. And so their orientation is very sort of like much more about controlling and much more about black and white, right and wrong, as a general principle within medicine. So, but science is very different. And so actually this is another problem, is that I was a scientist. I was trained in as a PhD. And then I was talking to physicians who found me offensive, right? Like, found me offensive. Like, I'm offensive. What I'm saying is offensive. I'm like, they don't understand where, like, our perspectives are so different. So but they just don't understand that. And they don't have the sort of awareness of all these deep kind of epistemological issues that I'm going through with whenever I talk about the sunscreen example. Man, it's very complicated, the way people's brains work and the way they come to think what's true and what's not true, and the way ideology affects things. It's such an interesting and complicated story, and just most people just don't even, many people, I think most people don't have like a working awareness of this. Maybe if you sit them at the table and breakfast or lunch or dinner, whatever, you sit down and talk to them for a while, they'll get it, but it's not the way they operate.
Yeah.
And so, but going back to their point of view, my questions were kind of theoretical. In general, sunscreens do, these sunscreens are helpful. There are some studies suggesting that they can cause these bad effects in animals at higher concentrations, but do they cause them at lower concentrations? We don't know. And so to me, it's unclear, but to them, for whatever reason, they thought that that's not the case. And so I started to realize that across a lot of different areas. The more I started communicating in kind of a positive way to like help people have more information, and doing it in the way that I do it, which is very detailed, and I like look into the methods, and I'm like really making sure I understand perfectly what the science says. I just started seeing this is all over the place. In every field, there's sort of ideological configurations that there's, the questions could be substantial, they may not be substantial, but like there's certain important questions that are often determined by ideology. Even though on the whole, the broad range of accepted knowledge is on the whole correct, there's, on the frontiers of knowledge, ideology has a much bigger role. And so I started to realize that, and then I started getting, I retweeted, I think I quote retweeted Elon's his awesome, or his hilarious tweet, although maybe it's not awesome or hilarious to some people, but he said, my pronouns are prosecute / Fauci. And I was already smarting from being constantly told, like I was at this point being told I was a grifter, and I'm like, you guys just don't understand what I'm trying to, like I'm just trying to and then I as soon as I retweeted this, I guess it's got dogpiled by like people who wrote New York Times bestsellers. They're like, yes, Kevin, I
Yeah.
know. They're like, I know you want to grow your audience, but this is not the way to do it. I'm like, I hate you people so much. Like, I hate you.
It's not what I'm trying to do, but all right.
Like, I started becoming more open to being wrong about COVID. And then also at the end of 2022, it's obvious that zero COVID was a dumb idea, right? But zero COVID is a very strong, very powerful part of the sort of COVIDian establishment community. In fact, one might say, or one does say, it is the case that Birx's point of view is zero COVID. Deborah Birx, the person in the United States who's responsible for the lockdowns, she originally, she's actually not just responsible for the lockdown. She said it was 2 weeks to slow the spread. But her, yeah, I mean, she actually the entire time was planning to extend those to really long, hard lockdowns. It was a bait and switch. That was her goal. She bragged about it in her book. Like, I told people it was 2 weeks to stop the spread, but haha, I was actually trying to trick them and to slowly eat them into.
And she did get a lot of people. I mean, she got most people, right?
No, she was amazing. Like I respect these guys, like in a way, like Fauci and Birx, like in a way, like they were very competent bureaucrats. They played power, and they played with power, and they used power in incredibly effective ways. They were very good at what they did.
Immoral, but effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Birx was zero COVID. So I just started to realize at some point in 2022, man, this whole zero COVID idea was dumb. And then I also became more open to alternative points of view in general. And so at that point, my brain was sort of seeing more broadly. I started to have this strong belief that we should be open to alternative points of view, because I was expressing alternative points of view that I knew were important and valuable and legitimate. And I started to think, man, maybe some of the points of view that I've been saying are bad, I've been emotional about. I've been like, well, you must not care because you don't want to wear a mask. You must be telling people not to wear masks because you don't care about people. You must be doubting the science about masking because you don't care about people. Maybe masking isn't perfect. Maybe it doesn't have an effect. Maybe, but we might as well do them anyway and not tell people that. Because if we do that, then we're discouraging them from potentially saving lives. And so I started becoming aware of and more open to alternative orientations to the science and alternative ways of thinking about and talking about science that were not just the one that I had at that time. And as I started to do that, and as I got dogpiled about this, my pronouns are prosecute Fauci, I started to realize I had been horrible to a lot of people. Like, I'd been horrible to a lot of people. The way that I was feeling as I kept getting basically ostracized from all of my communities, the way that I was feeling was the way that I must have made people feel about COVID and so many other things. It's the same way. I realized I was the person that people are being to me. Right.
Yeah.
And then that, if I'm going to be honest, that was the feeling that really undergirded that thread that you guys are talking about. This feeling of like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Because that's wrong to do that. And we were zealots. We were ideological. And so when I wrote that thread, I wrote it like in my underwear. I was like in bed. And also I had been through a lot in the sort of misinformation debunking world. I was kind of well known within the nutrition space. And I thought this was going to be like any other topic that I had dealt with before. People would be mad about it. Maybe I'd go viral and then it would go away, or, life would go on. Maybe like a professor would say, Kevin, you need to be careful about this, whatever. Like, I was used to getting into some trouble because the spotlight was on me sometimes, but I didn't realize what I had stepped into with COVID. Um, because it was bigger than that. And so yeah, that was the frame of mind that I was in. That's when I wrote my tweet. I was just excited it went viral. I didn't know. And then they, they gave me a bunch of these opportunities. I took them. I was successful with them, but I thought, I thought this was going to blow over. Like, and it turns out that the whole COVID narrative is very intrinsic to a lot of the issues and the problems that are occurring in this society right now. So I ended up going down that rabbit hole. So
Yeah, I mean, I find that people even to this day, I feel like most people will agree. I mean, most people will agree. Some people still don't, but that COVID or the pandemic is relatively, it's done. If it ever started, whatever. We don't have to start. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But I find that a lot of and my friends included speak in pre-COVID, post-COVID terms. Oh, what was life like before COVID, after COVID? And I think that the the grasp that this pandemic had on our society and our ways of communicating with people, our ways of looking at our fellow humans is something that's I'm not sure. I mean, my own theories are one thing, but I'm not sure that will. I don't know how long it's going to take for things to really go back to normal, for people to really put this behind them. I know whichever side of COVID you were on, it was a very emotionally based rhetoric on both sides. I'm not sure that the quote unquote science, and it honestly, it bothers me that word, the science, is now it's a stigmatized word now. But I'm not sure that the science will ever show one side was correct or one side was incorrect. I mean, I know where I stand, but I'm also not a doctor, and I don't know what my qualifications would be to determine the validity of any scientific explanation. But I don't know. I find that it's gonna be difficult for people to look back. I mean, I feel like one side, and which I would say is our side, not to say we're the best or anything, but the freedom standpoint, I'm not telling you what to do, don't tell me what to do, that never came from it never had a source of hatred within it. Whereas I think the other side was, like you said, was, oh, why are you trying to hurt me? I didn't do anything to you. Why are you trying to hurt me, when that's really not the case? So I feel like one side of this debate has put things behind us. I mean, I won't forget. Trust me, I will not forget what was done to me over the course of 3 years. How I was, and especially in Canada, I was rendered to second-class citizen status for over a year. I wasn't allowed to travel. I wasn't allowed to leave. I got kicked out of school. I mean, and there's thousands and thousands of students in the same boat as that. I mean, I won't forget, but I forgive. Whereas the people that still have that, that parasite in their head, they still have that resentment towards people like me, people like yourself who act, and maybe arguably even more, who was on their team at the start and then switched over to the evil guys or the bad guys. I don't know that side is going to ever, look at me like I'm human again. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I think the reason I want to suggest that the reason for that is that there's fundamental differences in worldview on each side. And I think that the side that, I mean,
there's a lot to unpack there. I know.
Yeah. I just don't want to be unfair. But I think it is true that on the left, and I think we're talking about the left here, right? We're talking about, like, you don't get like a hardcore conservative who is also a hardcore COVIDian. Like they don't like hardcore masker and vaccine mandates. Like I don't know if you know any conservatives who, I don't know. I don't think they exist.
Not off the top of my head.
I don't think one of them exists. Like a real dyed in the wool, So I think COVIDianism is an ideology of the left. So
yeah.
I think the different perspectives on COVID were basically, we talked about this earlier. It was a frontier area sense, or at least we thought it was. I think given what we know now, or at least what I know now, and probably a lot of people knew in 2020 who were really keyed into infectious disease and pandemic science, COVID actually wasn't that different from a lot of other pandemics. But we treated it a lot different, and we acted, and because we behaved as if it was different, ideology took a much bigger role. And I think for the ideology of the left is that there are oppressors and oppressed, and there are also saviors of the oppressed. And if you're a left-wing enlightened person who understands these systems of oppression and is saving the oppressed people from their oppression, then you're going to be really mad at me and you because we're the oppressors.
Yep.
We're the oppressors. I think that is why they hate us. They think we are evil. Like, and because oppressors are the quintessential thing that is evil in their worldview, because they're secular, they're material, they're not, many of them, some of them are religious, but we are the embodiment of evil.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that. If you, I read a really good book for my during my fourth year seminar. It was about the moral on. It was tracking the moral ontology of humans throughout time, and so around the Enlightenment period, you saw a secular turn where an egoism or this idea of self-righteousness entered society. And I mean, I don't want to say, oh, it's the abandonment of God, whatever, but once people start to look inward for their own answers, as opposed to looking inward for objective truth or for true moral guidance, that's when you know the ideologies take a nasty turn. I'm not saying human history is riddled with horrible stories, but once you take that secular turn and you do that in masses, you're able to pin people. You don't see people as equals. You don't see people as the same or as one. We see each other almost as bad guy, good guy, him and not him. So it's interesting you say the secular turn, because I couldn't believe that anymore. It's and when you see what's happened during COVID, I mean, it was nasty. It got really nasty.
And I'm wondering too, just to add to that, Camille, because I figure we probably were studying very similar course material around the same time. I mean, we get into to understanding characters like Amelia Durkheim, who understand the Industrial Revolutionary period too, that had individuals had lost those communities once based around things like religion, and so they were particularly secularized, and they were therefore searching for larger social causes that they could attach to that would give them those sense of community that they we had once held at a far
It's a
higher
purpose.
priority. Completely, yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, Kevin, if I mean, particularly speaking on the left, and it really seems, from my understanding, more the extreme left. I would
Or
consider myself.
authoritarian left.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes, as they both get authoritarian on the far sides of the spectrum. And I would
Right.
even consider myself still left. I certainly at one point held Marxist beliefs even, and had whittled my way out and become a little bit more balanced. But particularly in academic institutions, and I don't know if it's very much the same in all in the United States, but particularly as Camille can attest, in Canada, it's very extreme left has played quite a role within in the bedrock of our academic institutions as respect to policies and the overall sentiment amongst the student body. I'm wondering if that, in a way, I mean, what role perhaps do you think the academic institutions played in either encouraging or branching away, even if one was to think that, from the overarching COVID narrative, at least the overarching response narrative, if there was an encouragement of the narrative by the student body or by the universities, or if perhaps there wasn't. Did you find anything along those lines?
Yeah. So if you look at, there's a database by this guy named Adam Bonica, and he's a professor at Stanford, where he looks at well, the database actually is just the raw data. It's from the Federal Election Commission, I think it's called, the FEC, if I'm not mistaken. And that's public data about all donations, political donations made in the United States. So whether you made it to a Democrat or Republican, an independent, actually people's names are in there, their states, like all the information, personal information, really, with each contribution, the political party, the amount. And that database started in 1980 and is continuing on. We have data all the way up to 2022, and we have data for each 2-year period of all the political contributions made. And if you look at the professions, meaning sort of the white collar professions, media, law, medicine, those are like the only professions that matter to me, but like I know there's other ones. Tech,
Business,
finance,
finance.
exactly. You look at all the white collar, every single one without exception, starting in, I think I would say the late 2000s, so 2006, 2008, it's starting really in the Obama era in the United States, although I don't know if necessarily it's because of Obama. I think it's more of it's epiphenomenal. It's something that's not caused by Obama. It's caused by something else. But if you look at that period, you start to see a shift. In 2000, in 1980 to 2000, the professions are pretty evenly balanced between Republican and Democrat. But it's starting in like the late 2000s, you start to see a shift where, hey, suddenly it's more Democrats. It's like 60-40 Democrat to Republican, whereas it used to be like 60-40 Republican Democrat. Okay. Early 2010s, you start to see like 70% Democrat. By 2020, in medicine, it is 80% Democrat and 20% Republican, whereas, 20 years before and throughout the entire history of 20th century medicine, it was dominated by conservatives, really, like 60-40. So suddenly you have this massive sweep of left-wing ideology through the institutions. Now, there's other arguments for why this shift occurred, and this occurred not just in medicine, but in tech, in finance, in law, in media, among artists, all the white-collar professions where you're not a plumber, you're not an electrician, you're not a firefighter, you're not a farmer. All the white-collar professions, the college degree type professions, it happens in all of them at the same time. So what I think has happened in our institutions, without talking about the cause, what I think has happened is this left-wing ideology is now so ascendant, and in some ways conservatives are sometimes afraid to speak out as much. I think you become more of a target. So the people who are conservatives, who aren't well established, who aren't sort of seen as like this eccentric old man conservative who can say like whatever he wants, and those people exist. But like apart from those guys, I love those guys. I used to be horrified at them, but now it's like I still might be horrified at them to some extent. But apart from those guys, you put a target on your back, because you've got the far left, who is definitely a part of our institutions now. You've got more left wing, but they're not necessarily as radical, who aren't going to resist the far left. So within the institution, it becomes even more what the speech that's actually made and produced, and the knowledge production is even more left wing than even 80% Democrat, because of this sort of a suppression effect. And I think because of that, people are sort of in these bubbles who are on the left, and these ideas, these concepts these political concepts, they start to take on the appearance of the truth, because people aren't exposed to anything else.
Right. And they lack the initiative to go and confirm or corroborate the fact that they're given, right? It's they're given something, and that's the gospel. There's this lack of, desire to maybe dig a little deeper.
Well, it's disincentivized to dig deeper.
Very
if you
true.
did dig deeper and you found something different, you don't want to find that. If you then you might have to,
Yeah.
you might have to actually like have a conflict inside yourself. You might have, just don't look. Like if you hear somebody you thought might have been murdered next door, and by like a very powerful person, maybe like I didn't hear anything, like
what's the saying? Ignorance is bliss.
exactly. So then you look at recent documents in the American Academy of Medical Colleges about DEI, for example, diversity. These are supposed to be documents by an organization that's ostensibly scientific, but the whole document sounds like a humanities social science seminar course, a very politically, it sounds like it was written by activists.
Yeah.
And that's now, they can actually produce these documents, publish them, and they don't think anything of it. They think this is now the paradigm. And they don't think it's political. They think it's the truth. They must, or I don't know what they think, but it's like, it becomes, the institution becomes so suffused. So to answer your question, sorry, I was trying to give context. What exactly? I'm sorry. What exactly was the question? I'm trying to.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there, Doctor. I think you've answered it just actually quite eloquently, but it was just to understand if in what ways, if there were any, these current left-wing academic institutions had contributed to perhaps or inflamed the fan of the popular narrative that went along with COVID in respect to how to lock down or things along those lines there.
And do you think maybe it prolonged our ongoing mess, or the hysteria we saw in society, and do you think that maybe it played a role in do you think it prolonged it and maybe played a role in how people were interpreting the sets of facts the ever-changing sets of facts that we were given regarding COVID?
Yeah, I think it played a dramatic impact. I think and so the thing is before 2000, it was only the universities that were leaned left, that were overwhelming left, like maybe 70 to 80% of professors. If you look at the contribution data, and in 2000, 70-80% were left-leaning, 20 to 30% right-leaning. Fine, that's just how it is. It wasn't that way in the 1950s and 60s, but it might have been 2-1 in the 1950s, 60s, liberal to conservative 2-1, and then it's become much more maybe 4-1 by 2000. By 2020, it's now like 19-1. Okay, so it's also swept through the universities, but because the universities, now the ideology of the universities is aligned to the ideology of all the institutions. And that's happened in the last 20 years. And so what I'm getting at there is that actually makes the universities much more powerful in terms of the influence it has via this ideology. It resonates through all of society now, where it used to be, oh, you have a weird Marxist and tweed jacket talking about Herbert Marcuse, going into like unreadable books by Foucault, and I was like a Foucault leftist. That's its own, it's weird, but now now this ideology, this bizarre ideology, has now, and so yeah, I definitely think so. I definitely think that in a society where there was a greater balance of views, the left could have seen and would have been forced to have seen that alternative points of view had legitimacy. And I think that fact, the existence of viewpoint diversity and what would have resulted as a result of viewpoint diversity, the left seeing that there's this alternative point of view, this would have made it so that some questions, some perspectives, some kinds of science weren't untouchable, weren't unaskable. And that would have allowed us to have better science.
Yeah. What's ironic is that the principles of liberalism are founded on this idea of free expression and this exchange of thoughts. And I know Sheldon will agree with this. It's what really bothers me with regards to the educational institutions, especially universities. And I'm sure it's the same. And I mean, I go to a Catholic law school, so it's pretty good over here, but especially in Canada, I know all the public universities across the US, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds that go into university do not have a foundation or a political foundation, or they haven't formed their thoughts yet. And when they enter an institution that feeds them, I don't want to say propaganda, but a lack of balance between ideologies, like force feeds them one specific way of thinking, and God forbid you question that. See, that's what really bothers me, because look, I mean, we're young. When I was in first year of university, I didn't care about anything, right? Like I wanted to be not necessarily molded. I mean, I am who I am, and I'm like a pretty unique. But I know all my buddies. I mean, we were, there was an attempt to not, I don't want to say brainwash and use these extreme terms, but to, yeah, essentially force us to think a certain way. And for me, that is just unethical, especially going to an institution to learn and to grow your brain and to learn how to think, not necessarily because everyone can think, but learn how to think rationally and objectively and question things. That there, we don't see that anymore in university, especially not in undergrad.
No. And I just wanted to add really quick there. I'm just to add a really interesting point that you might think would add nicely with this, Camille, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and perhaps just see if you concur with this, Kevin. Is that with something you had mentioned earlier there, Kevin, about the diversity department going about it just seems that we've almost medicalized many, and particularly if someone fell in the lap of what social sciences departments that have taken hold of what you otherwise would assume to be unbiased medical organizations, at least in many of the writings in respect to things that we've medicalized terminology like someone might feel traumatized. Now, there is, of course, an appropriate time in which that would be substantial or significant enough to say with some weight and validity behind it. But many times it is also for a young person, just as you're saying this, Camille, it's brought up memories of my time in my first few years of university, almost taught that you are directed towards any attempt to avoid conflict whatsoever. So when you are grasping new ideas, there's an idea that you don't want to approach anything with conflict because of that almost the medicalization of these certain social terms. So I was just wondering, Kevin, and perhaps with all that being said, if you would have thought the same, or you would concur with that at all.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that it's terrifying how we've made, and we give it we've basically made what you say a moral litmus test, and then we've added credibility to that ridiculous idea by then medicalizing sort of the consequences of it.
Yeah.
So you're traumatized. You're not only like, you're a bad person, and you're also like traumatizing other people. Like,
Yeah, harming them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the victim mentality that we see now. It's words are weaponized, and I mean, I feel like it's a scary time to live in, to be afraid of what you say, to be afraid. And you see this in classrooms. I mean, people do not, and it's not even a fear of ruffling feathers, it's a fear of disagreement. And I think that leads that, I don't know what, maybe you have thoughts on this, what has led to this idea that people can't, debate or argue respectfully and rationally. I mean, you see, I mean, at my school, people are afraid to speak up when they disagree. And I don't know what this is going to look like in 20 years, because if we can't bounce our ideas around, what can we do, really? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a few fundamental things that we can do as humans, and open discourse for me is paramount, and we don't have that anymore.
yeah, I think the outcome, if we don't reverse this, is kind of a scientific and ethical and political dark age, because then the truth will be determined by who has the power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can't imagine that we're going to have a lot of progress in society that way. Progress can be seen as harmful, you know?
Yeah. And do you think cancel culture is going to play? I mean, I think a bit of a leading question, but do you think what role do you think cancel culture plays in this? And what do you think of today's cancel culture, as well as what we're going to see down the road if we don't stop this train pretty relatively soon?
So yeah, as people, you guys introduced me as an MD PhD student. I'm not an MD PhD student anymore. I am. I was dismissed from medical school in January. And when that happened, you know, the the young people, sort of the establishment and the extremists, but I mean, there's threads about this. I almost want to say it is the mainstream. They celebrated. It was like a celebration. Like, Kevin finally got what he deserved. He just couldn't stop talking about the things he shouldn't have talked about. There's finally accountability. We won. And they like it, like they love it. It's like it's and the thing is what they want. They want to make an example out of people like me, because then they want other people not to say anything. They don't want for this to spread. They don't want me to inspire anybody, because then evil will be in charge. Evil will be ascendant. So obviously, and it's not just from the left either. It's also from the right. The right cancels people too, and that's a whole nother topic. I mean, maybe, yeah, that's a whole nother topic. But like, we have a chilling of speech in general, because of. So everybody told me whenever I started talking about COVID, they said your career's over. Even my close friends are like, your career's over, bro. Like, don't do this. Don't go on Tucker. Like, this is just, do not, whatever you do, go on Tucker. And my parents who are like Christian conservatives are like, yeah, go on Tucker. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna go on Tucker. And everybody knows this. Everybody knows what things are going to get people canceled, what is going to put you at risk. And so there's acceptable speech and unacceptable speech, and it's because of cancel culture. So
And
yeah.
then just going to follow up there. So we've taken up quite a bit of your time, and just been such a privilege to chat with you. But what advice? I mean, you've gone through so much, but what advice can you provide to current and future students who might face similar ethical roadblocks? And what gave you the strength and integrity to do the right thing, especially when you were faced with the potential threat of your career?
What gave me the strength and integrity to do the right thing is I have overcome a lot to get where I am in my life. I've worked very hard to do that. And basically, it wasn't courage at all. It was naivete.
Mhm.
I thought, you know, everything will be fine. And obviously that was, yeah, it was naivete. But here's what I'll say to people who are thinking about doing something similar, because I still think I don't know. I believe in my heart of hearts that we're put here on this planet to, I mean, it depends, but whether it's, I mean, even if you're completely tend to be secular. So I tend to go in the direction, like I have a great deal of respect for people who are religious. I think about religion a lot and think about religious texts a lot, read them, love them as sources of wisdom. But I'm myself tend to be a doubter in religion, as I am in many things, but in religion it's hard for me to find faith. And so as somebody, here's a secular point of view, if we're all, if there's no afterlife, and if we're all just not, you know, we're not going to be here, you know, after we die, we're just going to, the only thing that's going to be left is other people. That's what's going to be left, and potentially all those other people could be gone, you know, if the earth explodes, or like the sun dies, or and we don't go to other planets, or we have global warming and we have like methane, and you know, we all die from inhaling sulfur that's been released by bacteria from the ocean or something. But if that doesn't happen, if we're able to keep going, if humans are able to keep going, then what we do in this life, it's like, it's so cheesy. As soon as I said that, I felt like I started hearing from Gladiator, what we do in this life, that goes. But what we do impacts other people that come after us, and we can have a negative impact or a positive impact. And if we are a totally secular person, that is our any chance of immortality that we have, and that legacy can be positive or negative. So our existence lives on through the people that come after us. And so I would just say, if we believe that humans are good and the human race succeeding and staying alive, and then speaking truth is going to be something good, and leaving a legacy of construction and of creating things that are true and that are going to guide humanity and guide other people to have good lives and to continue on this, I don't know, project of humanity. I think that's a good thing. If you're religious, obviously there's even more grounding than that. And so what I just want to say is I feel like speaking the truth is a noble and important thing. I was a little bit naive about what was required, but let me tell you about what I was naive about. And this is sort of my guidance, my help to other people who are listening, if they're thinking about going down this path. If you become unpopular, especially if you become unpopular among powerful people at your institution, different rules will apply to you than apply to other people. That's just how it is. And it's always been that way. Always. So if you're black, if you're a woman, if you're Jewish, you know, 100 years ago, same thing. They're going to try to get you. They don't want women here. They don't want black people. They don't want Jews here. So what they'll try to do is not everybody, but there will be some bad actors, right? And some of these people might have power. And then other people who may have some power may not want to deal with it. And so what I'll say is, when a different set of rules starts to apply to you, that means your performance has to be 2 times, 3 times, 5 times as good as everybody else's. You have less, you may not even have any chances. They, at the first small thing that you do, even if it's relatively normal or whatever, it's going to be a much bigger deal for you than it would be for anybody else in terms of the consequences. So what I'll say is, if you embark on this path, just know you need to be ready to perform at a level that's much higher than your peers if you're going to survive. And that is the lesson that I'm taking away as I continue on in my medical career, because I'm not giving up. That is the lesson I'm going to be taking away. And I think anybody who does this needs to be prepared to perform at that level. And if you're not, don't do it until you are ready to perform at that level. So it is possible to speak out, but you need to be ready for the real world implications of that. And so that would be my advice.
Well, on that note, I think we'll call it an interview. Kevin, this is incredible. I appreciate, we appreciate, Sam appreciates you, all the listeners appreciate you taking the time. I know we went over time, but we're glad that we were able to, hear your perspective. And I know Sheldon and I are we definitely took a few lessons from this. And I mean, you're clearly a bit too humble, but it does take courage. In my mind, I mean, you say it's naivete, it's not. I mean, perhaps you miscalculated the repercussions of taking a hard stance on something, but take it from someone that was personally affected by all of this. It's people like you. I mean, not only academics, but intelligent, people with integrity that stand up for what's right, especially in this situation where it was, it was a witch hunt. If you didn't agree with the dogma that you were the enemy, having someone like you publicly state that look, I was on this side, and I don't want to say saw the light, but I realized what a load of garbage they were feeding us, not rationally based, not scientifically based. It was pure ideology. It does take courage, because you sacrifice so much to have your truth be heard, and whether or not we end up being right down the road, it's the matter of fact that you took that stand and stood up for what you believed was right. And for that, I can't express my gratitude enough. And I'm sure Sheldon, I'll let you say a few words as well, but thank you. And it was really a pleasure to get to talk to you and to meet you. And we don't take lightly everything that you've done, everything that you've spoken out for, and everything that you've risked and sacrificed to stand up for the right thing. And I don't want you to take that lightly either.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those kind words.
And I mean it. I really do.
I hear that. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that a lot. I think I actually needed to hear that. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a huge, I mean, yeah, like we can't understand it for students who were going through it at that time in the universities. People like yourself were I don't know, Camille, if you felt the same. I'm sure you did. Our professors, in some sense, in one form or another, who we listened to, and for many of the cases, at least for providing more balanced information. So I was so appreciative, and love the way you came at it with humility, because we, as the future generation here, we still need to come to the table and bridge that gap, and to be able to do so with such a clear method forward from understanding people's backgrounds, and coming at it with being honest to admit mistakes, and being setting up with the best focus and of integrity is so beneficial. So thank you so much, Doctor. We so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And the future really does depend on us. So I'm hoping we can turn things around here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.